The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Peggy Elliott, and I work with Stahls ID Direct. Today, we're going to talk about choosing the right product for your fabric. There are so many fabrics in the industry that I know that it can be a challenge for new and current decorators to decide what product should be used on the various fabrics, especially with all the new types coming out. So we're going to talk about types of fabrics. We're also going to be reviewing fabric terminology. We'll talk about decorating challenges or different issues with decorating and how you can overcome them and provide solutions. We'll talk about types of wearables, and this is where we'll get into what types of garments are made from particular fabrics. We'll also go over a little bit about promotional products towards the end of our presentation today, and then we're going to also talk about, throughout the presentation, we'll give some tips for successful decorating using various methods. The first thing that we're going to talk about is one of the most common fabrics, excuse me, one moment. We're going to talk about one of the most common fabrics that is out in the industry for decorating, and we see it all the time in stores and on the web, and that is cotton, also cotton blends. Cotton is a natural fabric. It's made from the fibers that surround the seeds of a cotton plant, and then you have cotton blends, which incorporate a certain percentage of cotton and then other synthetic fabrics. Mainly you see a lot of polyester and cotton blends. So it might be a 90-10 where 90% is cotton, or a 65-35, 65% being cotton and 35 being polyester. Some of the characteristics of cotton are that it has a soft hand, so it's very nice for the person wearing it, and it often feels soft when you have a decorated garment and it's soft to the touch. It also has a very high absorbency, so it's got really good absorbency to it. That's going to be important in a minute when we talk about decorating methods. It's an easy to sew fabric, it's machine washable, and it prints well, so it takes ink very well. So what are some of the considerations for decorating? We're going to talk a little bit about shrinkage, the fabric weight. So how thick is it? Is it lightweight? Is it a thin fabric? Many of the t-shirts today are. You see the burnout fabric, which is almost sheer in certain areas. We'll talk about rib knits and piqué, moisture in the fabric, and darks versus lights. Some of this is going to repeat to some of the other fabrics that we end up talking about. But there's differences and similarities across the board with the different kinds of methods that you can decorate with and the fabrics that you're decorating. So shrinkage, why is this important? When it comes to cotton, when you're using different decorating methods, let's take heat transfer materials in particular, that is a material that from one to the next could vary in the thickness. So if you're using a heat transfer material that's very thin, when the garment is laundered, it can often cause shrinkage, and what results is a wrinkle in the design. So one of the things that you want to do if you're happen to be using heat transfer materials on cotton is choose a material that has a little bit more thickness to it. Not something that's going to be necessarily heavy on the garment, but something that's going to at least not be so thin that it doesn't wrinkle when it's shrinking. The other way that you can combat that is go for the 100% pre-shrunk cotton when you're using a thinner material. A lot of people like to use the thinner materials. They're easier to work with and you can get more detail with them. So it's important that if that's the preferred product, that you go for the 100% pre-shrunk cotton. Same goes with the lightweight and thin apparel. Again, you're going to want to stick with, in this case, you may want to choose a thinner material, so make sure that you do have that pre-shrunk fabric, or go with a supplier that has a fabric or t-shirt apparel that goes with less shrinkage or is marketed for that. Screen printing on lightweight or thin apparel, that's something that when you're screen printing every color, you want to make sure that you're not putting too much ink down. You also want to make sure that if you're doing a multicolored logo, you might want to look at how many colors are in the design, because if it's a very thin and lightweight garment, you're not going to want to layer on several colors of ink, because then the garment will become a little bit heavier, thicker to the hand when you feel it, and it may not be as comfortable to the wearer. Embroidery is another aspect. When it comes to rib knits and piqué, sometimes embroidery can be a challenge, and often these types of fabrics are within your polo shirts. So sometimes with the piqué, where it's a little bit of tiny holes, you want to make sure that you're using a good stabilizer or backing when it comes to the embroidery, and you also want to make sure that you're using the right needle size so that you're not making holes larger than necessary within the left chest logo, for example. Some of the other methods that can be used as well, applique. You see some of the distressed applique out in the market today, and what you'd want to probably do for that is choose a heavier weight t-shirt if you're decorating a t-shirt, or if you're doing a hoodie, then you want to make sure that it's a heavier, that's a heavier type item that would accommodate a 1 or a 2 color applique. If you're doing t-shirts, some of the distressed applique on the market that you see is usually done in a 1 color, and instead of using a polyester based twill applique fabric, they're using more of a soft cotton chino, so it's lightweight and very soft on the garment. And then there's also other methods of using transfers on t-shirts that are very popular in today's market. Nicole, if you don't mind, I would like to launch a few of the poll questions. We got off to a little bit of a late start, so I did kind of forget about that, but I wanted to get a little idea on what customers are doing in their business today and what type of equipment they own.
Okay, Peggy, our first question is...
I do apologize for the late start.
Okay, our first question is, do you own a heat press?
Okay.
This looks like we have the results. 100% of the audience do own a heat press.
Wonderful. That's the first time I think I've had 100%. Great. And we can go ahead and launch the other questions as well.
Okay, the second is, what types of fabrics do you decorate? Okay, we have 100% that does cotton poly. We have 23% that does sublimated. We have 55% with nylon, 39% that does lycra spandex, and 39% that does other.
And what was the percentage on the sublimated?
23%.
Thank you. And I think we've got one more question.
Okay, and our last poll question is, what type of services do you offer? And our results are 52% offer screen printing. We have 66 for embroidery, 24 for DTG, and 93 for transfers.
Lots of transfer users. Very popular today in the industry. All right, thank you, Nicole. So moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about nylon. And as you know, those of you that may be decorating nylon, half of you, or a little over half of you, are decorating nylon. It is a synthetic material, and it is exceptionally strong. It's abrasion resistant. It's got a lustrous finish, so a lot of times it's a shiny finish to it. It is easy to wash. It's resistant to damage from oil and chemicals, and there's a low moisture absorbency. And a little bit later in the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about specific nylons, such as talking about waterproof and water resistant. For those of you that don't decorate nylon, this will benefit you as well, because you're going to be able to see that there are different methods, and just it's a little bit different how you go about decorating nylon. So pretty much any fabric in the industry can be decorated. It's just a matter of what method to use and what technique you might need to apply for certain methods. So screen printing, all of you screen printers out there know that often that you need to put down a base so that you make sure that the inks adhere and bond to the nylon. Just screen printing directly onto the nylon can sometimes pose a problem with bonding to that surface because it is a little bit slippery, and it's sometimes the waterproof or water resistant coating, sometimes it's the oils used in manufacturing, sometimes it's the slippery nature of the fabric, and it's just hard to maintain registration of multiple colors when screen printing. There's also the heat transfer materials. This is something that if you're using a vinyl cutter and heat transfer materials, you're going to want to make sure that you look for a material that has an aggressive adhesive, one that maybe is specific to application to nylon fabrics. So there's different kinds of materials in the industry, and you just want to make sure that you look out for that. Again, with screen printed transfers and full color digital transfers, there's certain types of transfers that are intended for nylon application. So it's all in making sure that you're checking out what type of fabric you're printing on, and that you're also using the right product. Some of the things also with screen printing, I know that you can either flash cure or belt cure your fabric. So when it comes to nylon, it's been mentioned, I've seen it mentioned where flash curing is a preferable method, because you're not putting that nylon under the heat quite as for quite as long a time or high of temperature. Excuse me. The other thing again is the pre-treatment to hold the ink. The next type of fabric we're going to talk about, and this will kind of be repeated a little bit later as well because it comes into play with some of the other apparel we're going to be talking about, is polyester. Again, this is another synthetic type material. The nature of polyester is that it's strong, it's resistant for the most part to shrinking, it's resistant to most chemicals, it's got quick drying, and for that reason it's it's actually the base fabric of many of the moisture wicking materials out there in the industry, or performance wear as it's always widely known. It's also mildew resistant and wrinkle resistant, and it can easily be washed. So what are some of the challenges that you may face when decorating polyester? For those of you, actually all of you, responding that you own a heat press, which is fantastic to hear, dye migration can be an issue. So when you're applying different types of decorating methods, whether it's screen printing, any of those listed here, you want to make sure that you have, if you're screen printing, you're using an ink that has a higher opacity to it, or that you use an underbase. That's very important when screen printing so that you can block that dye migration. The other thing is for heat transfer materials. Again, there are different materials on the market, and there are those that are a little bit more opaque. They might be a thicker material as opposed to a thinner one, so that it blocks that dye migration. Opaque basically means that it's not transparent, for those of you that may not be familiar. And for screen printed transfers or full color digital transfers, it's basically the same thing. You want to look for something that's geared more towards blocking that dye migration. Another thing about polyester is that there's some stretch and recovery in that kind of fabric. So you want to make sure that whatever type of decorating method you're using allows for that stretch and recovery, or sometimes it's known as stretch and rebound. We like to say stretch and recovery because when you stretch it, it recovers back to its normal look and there's no distortion to the logo. So it's important that you use elastic or inks that have some elasticity to it, tongue twister, and also with heat transfer materials. Actually transfer papers, there's different types of transfers and heat transfer materials that do allow for stretch. So they've got that built into it, so it will stretch and recover. One of the other things with polyester is dark versus light colors. You want to make sure that you're using an opaque product again for anything that's dark so that that dark garment doesn't show through. And then the other decorating method that we have listed here is sublimation. Again, this is actually a very nice method for decorating polyester because this results in no hand whatsoever. So you have different products that might feel a little bit thicker on the garment. You have some that provide a soft hand. Sublimation goes right into the fabric, so it offers virtually no hand. The next product we're going to talk, or fabric we're going to talk about, is neoprene. Neoprene is something that is becoming very widely known in the industry because it is something that is a lot of promotional products are made from, and that industry is just booming. So for those of you that may not be familiar with decorating neoprene, there are a number of ways that can be decorated as well. It's an abrasion-resistant fabric. It's tear-resistant. It's the type of material that a lot of wetsuits are made out of, or koozies. In this case, you see the laptop bag. A lot of the iPad cases now are made from this material. It's resilient. It's oil, water, and solvent resistant. So what are some of the considerations for decorating? Well, for one thing, it is a thicker fabric and it's heat sensitive. So with this thickness, and the type of fabric that it is, you're probably not going to be seeing too much embroidery on something like this. It's also, as I said, heat sensitive, so you're going to look for the method of decorating that you want to use. You want to make sure that you're not putting too much heat on it, or sometimes that color of the neoprene may actually take the heat of the heat press and it may leave a square around it. So for those, when you're heat pressing an item like this, that's something that could happen. It's also got some elasticity to it. You can have dye migration occur with neoprene as well, and again, this is based on the color. Your reds or your blues, your darker colors, are going to have a tendency to migrate more, so you want to make sure you still have that opaque type decorating method, or whatever transfer type product you're using, it has the capability of blocking that migration. Are there any questions, Nicole?
Not so far. We don't have any questions.
Okay, wonderful. Keep right on going then. The next type of item that we're going to talk about is polypropylene. This is basically characterized by its lightweight nature. It's got a high strength to it. You know that this is more of an eco-friendly material, very popular in the industry again. It's got abrasion resistance to it. Something like this is where you're going to be decorating something of a polypropylene bag, or reusable bag as they're known. You're going to look at screen printing, you'll look at full color digital transfers and transfer papers, as well as heat transfer material. The importance of these decorating methods with polypropylene is they can be lightweight. So this bag is thin and lightweight. It's not something that you're going to want to put a lot of color layers on. You're not going to want to do too many colors of screen printing because you don't want to end up making the bag feel heavy. Again, it's not something that may be typically embroidered as you would a hoodie or a thicker fabric. Screen printed transfers or transfer papers, and heat transfer material. So you're going to think about using thinner heat transfer materials, single layers, and maybe keep your colors limited to 1 or 2 colors as opposed to maybe a 3, 4, or 5 color design. This is going to also keep your decorating method less expensive, and these bags themselves are inexpensive, so you're not going to want to add too much cost to this by taking a number of inks and applying it, or increasing the cost of the decorating method. The next fabric we're going to talk about is leather and leatherette. Basically, you've got your leather. It's a material created through the tanning of animal hides, as you probably well know, and it does take dye well. And then there's leatherette, which is a simulated leather. And there's not a whole lot of decoration that you see real often in the industry with this. You see some here and there. It is a higher cost item, so typically what you see in methods of decorating are debossing or embroidery. However, you can also use a full color digital transfer. In this example, we're showing a metallic digital transfer that gives a little bit higher end look to it because it is a higher end item. Some of the things that you just need to be aware of with that is that leather is heat sensitive, so you might have that heat from the heat press, that square that shows up on the garment. So you want to make sure that you're raising the surface of the item that you're heat pressing, if in fact you are using a heat press process. And then the oils and the tanning process. You want to make sure that if you're using a full color digital transfer that the adhesive is aggressive enough to apply to the leather. Your debossing is more or less like an imprinting, so it's actually imprinting the leather. And then with embroidery, one of the things that you want to make sure that you consider is that you're using the proper needle. There's different needles for different types of fabrics, so again, that you're not making too big of a hole or you're not ruining the product. So you want to make sure that you're using the right type of needle, and there are those that are specific to leather goods. Now we're going to turn into some of the type of apparel on the market. So we kind of talked about different types of fabrics. We're going to turn that into, the next conversation is going to be more about apparel. So we talked about polyester, and now we're going to talk about performance apparel. Performance apparel is basically made from polyester. Most performance apparel is. A lot of it is a polyester spandex, and also widely known as Lycra in the industry. That's a brand name. But again, performance apparel has moisture wicking properties, so it's going to channel perspiration away from the body. This comes in the form of compression gear, is one of the terms in the industry as well. It's a breathable and lightweight fabric, and again, it's got stretch and recovery. So with those different characteristics, you're going to want to make sure that you're using the type of method that will stretch with the fabric and recover, and you also want to make sure that you're watching out for that dye migration again. So in this particular photo, we have an example of a screen printed and a full color digital transfer. In this case, the screen printed method wasn't using the proper type of ink. So it just goes to show that if you're not careful in using the right inks or right decorating method and using the right techniques, that you can have end up with an issue with your product. So you can see there's a little bit of cracking in the screen printed without using the proper ink. So make sure that you're always using the proper decorating method and technique when you're decorating your items. Sublimated apparel. This is another polyester, obviously based apparel line. So when you're sublimating apparel, it does need to be a polyester base. And these are some of the different uses that we've seen in the industry, in particular to sports, where sublimated apparel is being used across soccer, roller hockey, cycling. It's even in fashion. A lot of the stores now are showing different shirts for women, fashion apparel that has been sublimated. One of the things that you want to make sure that you're paying attention to with this, and this is more in a care instruction, one for when you're putting an item like this into the washer or dryer, you want to make sure that you're putting the dryer on low heat. What can happen is you can reactivate the dyes, and it can transfer to other clothes perhaps in the dryer. So you might even want to dry it on low or line dry it. The other thing is decorating tips. When you're heat applying sublimated apparel, you want to make sure that you use a cover sheet so you're protecting your upper platen from any type of ink transfer. And for team uniforms, this is the next area that we wanted to go into because, again, all the fabrics that we've mentioned so far, these team uniforms are constructed of those fabrics. So it's more tips on how do you decorate these fabrics and what they're made from. A lot of people don't know necessarily that dazzle is made from not only polyester, but it also can be made from nylon. So it's really important to check out when you're decorating a dazzle fabric whether you have nylon or whether you have polyester, so you can get the appropriate technique down for whatever decorating method you happen to be using. We're also going to cover a little bit about the meshes that are used. So we've got Trico, and these are some industry names that if you're not familiar with, hopefully this will help you out a little bit. Micro mesh, which a lot of the times is a polyester-based fabric. There's also porthole mesh. And one of the tips we have for doing different types of mesh jerseys when you're decorating, whether you're screen printing or using heat transfer products, is you want to make sure that you insert a Teflon sheet or some type of other item in between the layers of the garment so that you're not having any inks go through to the other side. Next, we want to talk about promotional products because, again, this kind of covers the gamut of some of the things that we've talked about, some of the fabrics we've talked about. You see the nylon chair, the nylon umbrella, and then again we have a neoprene laptop case. These are all items that are made from those fabrics, so you still need to take the same care and consideration when decorating. And the last thing we're going to talk about is just a little bit of fabric terminology before we get into care instructions. So there's flame resistant and flame retardant. And these are important things to know about because, again, you're dealing with different chemical agents or finishes that may interfere with the decorating method you're using. So it'll help you choose the right screen printing inks, the right transfers or transfer papers, and the right heat transfer materials. So flame resistant is basically a chemical agent or finish that helps to resist from burning. And the difference between that and flame retardant, one is completely resistant and one is it reduces the flammability. So it's just different levels of flame retardancy. The other is water repellent and water resistant. These are often confused in the industry and can be challenging. Also, waterproofing. So water resistant and water repellent are more similar to each other in that it's a wax coating treatment, and basically it makes it repellent. It doesn't necessarily prevent water from seeping through. So it can be repellent, whereas waterproofing is a tightly woven nylon where the pores are completely closed and won't let water or air pass through them at all. And the reason these are also important is because of those finishes. Sometimes when people have asked us about decorating umbrellas, especially with a heat press or any type of heat being needed within the application, is it going to ruin the waterproof nature of that fabric? And the answer is yes, it could. So again, when you're using your heat press or any other type of decorating method that might require heat, you want to try to keep just that area that you're printing onto exposed to that so that you're not wrecking any of the waterproofing. And in the upper right of this slide, you're looking at a PK or a mesh, and this is the type, it's just basically a close-up showing you the nature of the holes and how that can be possibly a potential for embroidery to sink through the holes. So again, if you want to do a really nice logo, make a good safe backing, you're using the right needle size. So this is some close-up photos that help show the type of fabric. And the bottom left with the eagle, you can see the denier. It's a cordura fabric as well as a jacket. And let's see what we're going to talk about. Is we're going to talk about separating. So some of the things that we've already talked about, basically you want to make sure that you understand what fabric you're working off with first and foremost. And you also might require samples for testing. There's a lot of different suppliers in the industry of blank goods that would send you fabric that you could test out your decorating method with. And also preheating. Preheating is very important because, as we talked about earlier, with cotton, it has a high absorbency rate. So a lot of times moisture in the fabric can interfere with your application when you're heat printing. So you want to make sure that you preheat before you actually apply your product. There's a couple different accessories that can be helpful to you: Teflon pillows, flexible application pads. These are items that are going to help raise the surface and give you a stable surface to work with when you're doing any type of application. It also helps get buttons and seams and zippers out of the way. Another thing that you need to keep in mind is, again, the pre-treatment. We talked about pre-treating for when you're using screen printing inks so that it bonds to the nylon fabric. And then also making sure you're using the proper backing with embroidery, correct size and type of needle, especially with leather and some of those other delicate fabrics. And one of the last things we want to just cover today for you is all about the label in the garment. And this might just seem like a basic common thing, but we do have questions a lot from customers on the phones and customer service where they'll call and ask what particular product they should use for their job, but they're not really sure entirely what their fabric is made of. So it's just important to make sure that you do check that label, you know what material you're working with. And even when it comes to whether it's 100% cotton, whether it's pre-shrunk, or whether it's a combination of fabrics, is very important. The other reason this can be useful for you is if you have a customer walk in the store and they bring a certain garment to you and they want you to decorate 10 more, or they need a new set of uniforms for their team. There's something called an RN number listed on the back of the tag, and this number you can type into the FTC database and find the manufacturer of that type of apparel. So you can kind of track it back if that's something that is a favorite of your customer and you're just not really sure where to get that type of a garment. You can track it that way. And lastly, very important to point out is care instructions. A lot of times customers of ours will have their customers may not indicate wash instructions. And so customers will end up taking their items and washing them according to the label on the garment. So it's really important that you encourage the customer to take care of based on the decorating method that you use to decorate their garment. A lot of times those two things are not alike. The garment may be washed one way before it's decorated, but then once it's decorated with, say, a heat transfer material, for example, that might require a different type of care, be it line drying versus washing in the dryer and drying with the dryer. So another important thing to point out. And that basically is the end of our presentation for today. Nicole, do we have any questions?
Yes, Peggy, we actually only have one question, and it says, what is your recommendation for the best type of heat transfer on waterproof materials?
On waterproof materials, there's different waterproof materials in the industry. The biggest thing you're probably going to find is that you're using a nylon when it comes to waterproof. Sometimes it can be a Cordura base, but basically what we recommend is looking at the heat transfer materials, whichever type that you're buying, and make sure that it includes description for either key is waterproof or that it says that it's for a nylon fabric, because then you're going to know that the adhesive is such that it will adhere to that nylon despite the waterproof coating or the oils in that nylon.
Thank you, Peggy. I have another question.
What do we think?
We have another question.
Oh, sure.
Okay, it says, what's the best CAD cut material for camp chairs that are made of heavy-duty canvas-type nylon, not the shiny nylon?
Heavy-duty type nylon camp
Canvas.
chairs?
Camp chairs, I'm sorry.
Okay. There's different materials. It's just going to be based on what that chair is made out of. Generally, it's going to be a polyester or nylon base camp chair. Even if it doesn't have a shine to it, doesn't necessarily mean it's not polyester or nylon. So you're going to want to look and make sure that whatever material you're choosing from whatever supplier you use, that they have those characteristics listed in their description. And most suppliers do. They're going to list whether it's for cotton, polyester, nylon. They may indicate even fashion or performance wear and let you know that way as well.
Okay, thanks a lot. So it looks like all the questions we have for today.
All right, well, thank you, and thank you everyone for attending. Please join our next webinar, which is creating a winning game plan for fall sports, and that's coming up on July 20th, and how to profit during the back-to-school season on July 27th. And if you have any other questions, we'll be sure to answer those in a follow-up blog post on greatgarmentgraphics.com. Thank you.